Hi, this is Misha, and I wanted to talk to you today about a gun that's been underappreciated or even much maligned. You know, it's the German K98 Mauser, and just no one ever gives these guns attention. You know, when people think of World War II, they think of Carcanos and RCKs, and of course I'm just messing with you. And the K98 Mauser is probably the most quintessential, or in the top 3 of World War II guns. What I do really want to talk with you seriously about are the so-called Russian capture K98s, or just RCK98. These guns now, in the last couple of years, they're starting to get some recognition finally, but for years they really were looked down upon by collectors and even by some shooters. And I never really understood exactly why. So yeah, just thought I'd share some thoughts on the Russian capture. Before we get going, this is probably one of my more correct Mausers. It's not 100%, but it's pretty darn close. And it's an early production too. This is a 1936. Code S42, which means Mauser work. Be an early production gun, and it has not been Russian captureified. Still has a blued finish, hardwood stock with straight butt plate, all milled parts, no front sight protector. Notice there's no grooves, even in the base. Early on they didn't. Has the earlier style of cleaning rod. Bayonet lug, machined barrel bands. You get the idea. This is a pretty good example, not the best, but pretty good example of a non-Russian refurbed K98. And this one is matching. A lot of vet bringback guns are so-called bolt mismatches. The biggest reason the reason I kind of feel is probably true about that is because when they were disarming Germans, when they were basically collecting 98 Mausers, they would quickly and easily render them basically inoperable by just removing the bolt and throwing it in a completely different place. So you could have a pile of rifles over there, but even if someone went over and grabbed it, who cares, because there was no bolt in it, not to mention ammo or anything else. So when GIs would bring these home, you would see often the bolt would not match. Not always, but often. Also, some vet guns would be so-called duffel cut, and usually on this gun it would be right here under this barrel band. They would cut it down here on the stock so they could then take it out of the stock, take the action out, and put it in a duffel. Of course, the flip side, these wouldn't have import marks. Various German Mausers came in during the 50s and 60s, mostly thanks to Inner Arms. Then in the 80s and 90s, other batches would come in. You would see some from the former Yugoslavia, some from Albania, some from Romania. There were all kinds of imports. These would have small markings typically on the barrel, and they would usually not have great finishes, and they definitely wouldn't be matching at least 9 times out of 10. And people accepted those guns, especially as shooters. But when the Russian captures showed up in the late 90s, early 2000s, a lot of people turned their nose up at them. Let's get over the shortcomings first off. These have been re-arsenaled, refurbished. The original bluing is most often replaced with this darker Russian style bluing, like you see on, say, Mosin Nagants, that were also refurbished. And the stocks were often given a new oil finish, and an X was stamped into the receiver. Now, interestingly, the X was stamped when Russia captured these in the 40s, so long before the refurbishment. I've seen guns with the X, but without the refurbishment, and typically the story there was they were given to East Germany for use in the early 50s. Either way, you'll see the X. Now, a lot of people say that the Waffen amps, the swastikas, the small little ones, were peened out on Russian captures. Yes and no. I don't Some were, but a lot were not. It seems like it was a very hit or miss thing. I would honestly say it's approaching 50-50. I've seen almost as many with Waffen amps intact as I have missing, but it's a possibility, so something you should look at. And finally, the serial numbers really won't match, or maybe will be forced matching on these, because what they did, they would just take all the K98s that had been captured throughout the war, and they would basically inspect them, and any rusted, damaged, hinky part would be tossed out and another part pulled out of a pile. Now, the upside to this is a couple of things. For one, the guns that went through the inspection, the ones they kept and rebuilt, almost always have good to excellent bores, because ones with poor bores, very pitted bores, just got thrown away. And again, these were all inspected for mechanical reliability, and ostensibly they were all head spaced. Now this is a little bit I don't think they were really getting into like go no gauge. I think they were just probably using something close to a field gauge, or kind of a good enough thing. But generally speaking, the Russian capture K98s have good headspace. That said, if you get one, never hurts to check. Another thing, these guns have legitimate history. Like this one here was made by Steyr in 1941. So we can pretty safely assume that it was captured in 42 or 43 on the Eastern Front. This gun probably marched into Russia and was captured by Russians. It has history. Some of your late war guns, maybe not so much, especially like the American capture ones from 44, 45. Those are probably pulled right out of warehouses, arsenals, or even the factory. So they never had anything. And that's not to say they're not cool, they definitely are. But this gun and many Russian captures like it have that distinction of having gone there and done that. That is neat to me. And on top of that, the whole Russian refurbishment is just added history. That's one more thing. It was like it was re-arsenaled and reissued by another military. The idea was they wanted to have these in reasonably good repair, and they put them in long-term storage just kind of in case, either in case war ever broke out in Europe against the Western Allies, or if an ally, say China, North Korea, Vietnam, needed guns, and some of them were given to Soviet allies. It was kind of a waste not, want not mentality. Plus, it was the Soviet Union where people were guaranteed jobs, and so giving someone a job to help refurbish these was a good use for their time and labor. Now, a couple of things. Oftentimes, the Russian captures will not have the cleaning rod, they won't have the front sight hood, and they won't have the so-called capture screws. People have debated why this is. I'm not going to get into it now, but you can always add these back. In fact, the ones on this one came from Apex. For a time, they were selling a kit with the front side hood, the cleaning rod, and the capture screws. And the funny thing is they have the same blued finish from Russia, so these obviously probably came out of Russia. I would imagine that Russia just kept them separately and never bothered about putting those parts back in after the refurbishment, just because they weren't really useful. I mean, the screws aren't known for backing out without the capture screws. The cleaning rod is next to useless, and the front side hood, it's all right, but I mean, honestly, they're a bitch to get on, so maybe the Russians just didn't want to mess with it. They do suck getting on. And of course, earlier guns didn't even have a front sight hood like this one, so maybe they just wanted to have a uniform front sight picture. Of course, I'm completely speculating. These guns tend to have still very nice, smooth actions. They have your typical Mauser trigger. And of course, they were originally built in Germany, so they have the same quality of barrel, receiver, other parts as this gun here. Honestly, I would say this gun has a nicer trigger than my 36. I mean, they're both good triggers for military, but this has a little bit nicer feeling trigger. So I'm happy these are starting to get attention, but for so long they were not, and they were a steal. You could get these for $100, $150, $200. Only now they're starting to encroach upon $500 or $600. And what amazes me, people are saying, I can't believe that happens. People are paying that for RCK98s. No, they're paying it for German K98s that are in good shape. They just happen to have been captured by Russia after the war. I don't think that takes away from their World War II history or German heritage very much. And now that no more K98s are really coming in, it's a good option, especially if you're wanting a shooter or an example piece. Maybe if you're a reenactor, this would be one that you could take out that would look great and still be technically original, but not worrying about if you broke apart and needed to replace it because it's not matching anyway. There's a lot of reasons to really look at Russian capture K98s. Also, there are some just rare variants in this, especially like late war guns with the stamped rear sight from Czechoslovakia that you just don't find that American GIs brought home. So you can definitely find some interesting receiver codes and year codes on these. And again, they're usually not priced any more than others. So that's why I really sought to have a RCK98 in my collection, and I almost waited too late myself. I can't tell you how many I had come through my hands over the years, but as they really started to dry up, I picked this one out. I like that it's BNZ, which is Steyr. 41, a good mid-production gun. So I'm glad I picked it up before they completely dried up. But yeah, don't be surprised if these start to kind of go higher and higher and get close to the prices of other, you know, post-war issued and or refurbished guns, because they really are legitimate. Are they as good as a World War II vet bringback? Of course not. Are they as good as a matching example? Of course not. But with those put aside, they're as good as really any other import we've had over the last 20, 30 years. So yeah, don't turn your nose up at a Russian capture K98 if a nice one comes along. And if you're interested in the history of Mausers, we have videos in the playlist, of course. We like Mausers around here just fine. If you have any questions or comments or want to share your own Russian capture K98 stories, we'd love to hear them down below. If you liked the video, please click, and if you'd like to help support the channel, please check out the link to our Patreon page. Well, this is Misha, and we will catch you next time.